Building Resilient Systems to Prevent and Contain Cybersecurity Threats. I'm Tonya Hall for ZDNet and Tech Republic, and joining me is Dr. Ron Ross, Fellow at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Welcome, Ron.
Good afternoon, Tonya. It's good to be with you again.
Absolutely. Welcome back. Tell us about, as a reminder, what is NIST's role in cybersecurity, and what do you do for NIST?
Well, NIST is part of the Department of Commerce. We're one of the three bureaus under the Department of Commerce, and we have about 6 or 8 different laboratories that deal with things like physics and chemistry. And my laboratory that I'm part of is the Information Technology Laboratory, and that's where you'll find our 2 cybersecurity divisions. We have one division that works on kind of cutting edge research, crypto, and things that are more foundational. And our applied cybersecurity division works on things that are more application oriented, healthcare, financial applications. And I'm on the side, the computer security side, that deals with things like FISMA, risk management frameworks, security controls, security engineering, and things that get below the waterline, where systems are really developed and where the security gets applied at the lowest levels of that system.
In the event of a national or global cybersecurity emergency, we have to assume that some of the very important systems in the government, defense, and industry may be compromised by threat actors. So tell us about the report that you co-authored called Cyber Resiliency: Considerations for the Engineering Trustworthy Secure Systems.
Sure. This is one of the passions we've been pushing for the last 3 or 4 years. We're trying to move security from just the basic cyber hygiene, where people configure firewalls and they do all the things like antivirus software. We're trying to push the security down to the actual engineering, the lowest levels of the system, where you actually build security in as part of the life cycle. And so to get a more trustworthy system, we've learned over the last 3 decades that it's not good enough anymore just to try to stop the adversary at the boundary of the system. We know the cyber attacks are occurring. They're doing great damage. And so our new strategy with our engineering guideline, and this is the 2nd volume that deals with cyber resiliency, we're trying to have a 3-dimensional strategy now. The first dimension is still, as it always, penetration resistance first. Do everything you can to stop the adversary. But if they do get in, the 2nd and 3rd dimension now, the 2nd dimension is to limit the damage they can do once they've penetrated the system. And the 3rd dimension is to make the system survivable or resilient, so it can actually continue to operate even while the adversary is inside the system. So you're operating while you're under attack. And that's a very different type of mentality, a different type of mindset than we've had for the last 30 or 40 years. And that's where our new publication is focusing. What are the techniques, the approaches, the objectives that you would have if you want to build a system that can actually be cyber resilient?
Certainly hardening the target against compromise is the first step. What are some of the strategies for limiting damage to a target after it's actually been compromised?
Well, so when you limit damage in the 2nd dimension, we can do it in one of 2 ways. We can either limit the horizontal movement of the adversary. Typically in these bad cyber attacks, the adversary gets in by compromising a credential. Sometimes they're not using multi-factor authentication. They compromise a password. They get into the system, and then they will escalate their privileges, so they get the privileged user access. And once they get privileged user access, they can then have access to lots of things in the system that they shouldn't have access to. And they can also move laterally across that system and even jump across systems, other systems, so you can do a transitive attack. They may move over several systems so they find the payload that they're looking for. And so that's trying to limit their movement horizontally. Requires good system security engineering techniques where you separate, we call it network segmentation or domain separation. You separate everything in the system into compartments, and then you use strong authentication, so you require the adversary to move from compartment to compartment. It's almost like having a house where inside the house you put really strong locks in every door. So the bad guys, when they come in the house, they have to get into every room by getting through that particular barrier, that lock on that door of that room. The other dimension that we try to look at in this, in addition to horizontal movement, we try to limit the time they have on target. So adversaries need to get in, they need to have time to understand the environment, and then they have to have time to carry out the attack and either bring down your system from a capability perspective, or they have to have time to exfiltrate, steal all the information that they're looking for. So we're looking at virtualization techniques and micro virtualization techniques, which means you churn the system faster than the adversary has time to do damage. So with a virtual machine, for example, that malicious code that's in that VM, once that virtual machine is gone, the malicious code goes away with it. And we're now finding ways to micro virtualize. You're virtualizing smaller and smaller pieces of the system. And when you do that, it makes it very difficult for an adversary to have a coordinated attack because their environment is changing faster than they can react to.
How about fooling the threat so they don't know where they are?
Well, we have a lot of ways in our volume 2 of the 800-160 publication. We have a whole range of cyber resiliency techniques and approaches that our customers can use even on their legacy systems. So you mentioned misdirection and misleading the adversary. There's a lot of things. There's moving target defense by moving assets around within the infrastructure, putting in false information. So when they get information, they're really not sure if this is legitimate information or information that's been modified just enough to make it not useful for the adversary. So we have all those different types of things that we can do to make their life miserable once they're inside that system. And it's delaying tactics, it's giving them bad information, it's confusing them as far as what the architecture looks like, and not using the same types of components. A lot of organizations like to have homogeneous components where you have the same operating system, the same types of databases, the same antivirus software. But if you have heterogeneous components, then a single vulnerability in a single component or a single vendor, it won't take down the entire system. And that's another technique that we can use to kind of give the adversary, make their work factor go up appreciably. So they either get tired, move on to somebody else, or they just can't get the stuff they need.
How does an organization go about testing for cyber resilience? Are our white hat hackers better than those of our adversaries?
Well, I think the folks that we have in our country on on that side of the house, they're the best in the business. And I think from the organization's perspective, the first thing that you have to do with a legacy system, and most of our systems are not new. A lot of them are in constant state of upgrades, and occasionally you get a brand new system, but most of our stuff is legacy or existing systems. The first thing you have to do is do a good architectural analysis of that system. You have to understand all of your system components, what things are hooked up to other things, where all your connectivity is, and do a good network architecture so you can see what you have and how things are connected within that architecture. And then once you have that information, then you can start to look at what do each of these system components do? What are my current vulnerabilities in that component? Or what vulnerabilities accrue from the connectivity of all those system components? And then once you have that kind of ground zero, the ground truth about what the system looks like and your vulnerabilities, then you can take a look at the threat actors out there. What are they capable of doing to systems like mine with these particular vulnerabilities? So it's kind of customizing the known threat with where your vulnerabilities are in the system that you built. Once you have that information, now you can go into our 800-160 volume 2, and you can construct from our framework, which has a lot of different options for techniques and approaches. You can customize, you can say, what are my goals and my objectives to make my system cyber resilient? And based upon your particular goals and objectives and your particular system, how you've built it, you can then start to select various techniques and approaches, which gets you into specific technologies and the things we talked about earlier, about what kind of techniques do you want to employ to make your system as cyber resilient as it needs to be. Now, the answer to that question is going to be different. If I have a power plant, for example, and I have a high availability requirement versus a system that is maybe doing payroll and doesn't have quite that real-time or mission-critical type of aspect to it, that's where the different decision makers are going to come up with different solutions based on what their criticality needs are. And that's going to be different across our entire critical infrastructure. It'll even be different within the federal government and our Fortune 500 companies or even small mom and pop companies.
How does NIST partner with or support, in fact, businesses and other private organizations to create their own cyber resilient systems?
We have a lot of outreach. I guess our first level of outreach comes with all of our special publications that we publish in draft form before we ever lock those publications down. So the public gets a chance to look at the work we've done. And our volume 2 now in the 80160, the cyber resiliency publication, it's actually out for public review. And we've just received comments back a couple of months ago on that document. So we take all that input, and that gives our customers a chance to see what we're doing, actually give us suggestions, and then we incorporate all that back into the final publication. We also have a small business outreach program in the NIST cybersecurity area that helps small businesses understand how do you apply all of this NIST guidance, which is a lot of volumes, a lot of publications. How do you apply that to a small business? Something that a small business owner can get their arms around, something that's cost effective for what they would like to do, as opposed to being in a very large and better resource company, because resources are an issue for companies of all sizes. And the smaller the company is, the less access they have to the kinds of resources they need to actually lock those systems down. So we hold a whole range of things where we try to engage with customers, and just contacting us through email, on our website, or through Twitter, whatever means you want to use to get a hold of us. We are always ready to and standing by to help our individual customers to do a better job of helping them protect their systems.
Dr. Ron Ross, fellow at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. If somebody wants to connect with you, Ross, how can they go about doing that?
There's a couple of easy ways. My email is always the best way. It's ron.ross@nist.gov. And you can also connect with me on Twitter at Ron Ross Secure. And I'm on LinkedIn as well. And we have our website that has hundreds of NIST publications. It's csrc.nist.gov. And that's up all the time, except during the shutdown, unfortunately.
Except for that. Well, thank you for working in. Thanks for making it back. Sorry that happened to you. And if you guys want to connect with me, you can. You can find me right here on ZDNet or Tech Republic, or go to my website, tonyahall.net. I've got links to all my social sites. Thanks for watching.